Let's look at Musée des Beaux-Arts, and on the weekly calendar, you'll see on Monday I assign for you to read the poem. So let's read the poem together, and as we've done before, I'll read it once out loud, and then I will hit pause, and you should read it a second time out loud. Poetry, just like song lyrics, is better understood the more times you hear it. So let's start by looking over here at this painting. You can make that painting larger when you're in the document in Google Classroom and take a closer look at it. It's by Peter Bruegel the Elder, and the title of the painting is The Fall of Icarus. And W.H. Auden, in our poem Musée des Beaux-Arts, references this painting, and that's why I've included it here for you to look at after we read the poem. Musée des Beaux-Arts, W.H. Auden. About suffering, they were never wrong, the old masters. How well they understood its human position, how it takes place while someone else is eating or opening a window or just walking dully along. How, when the aged are reverently, passionately waiting for the miraculous birth, there always must be children who did not especially want it to happen, skating on a pond at the edge of the wood. They never forgot that even the dreadful martyrdom must run its course. Anyhow, in a corner, some untidy spot where the dogs go on with their doggy life and the torturer's horse scratches its innocent behind on a tree. In Bruegel's Icarus, for instance, how everything turns away quite leisurely from the disaster. The plowman may have heard the splash, the forsaken cry, but for him it was not an important failure. The sun shone as it had to on the white legs, disappearing into the green water, and the expensive, delicate ship that must have seen something amazing, a boy falling out of the sky, had somewhere to get to and sailed calmly on. I'm going to pause the recording now, and you should read it once out loud yourself. Now let's just quickly talk about a few things that you may not even know what they mean, and let's start with the title of the poem, Musée des Beaux-Arts. If you take French, you might know actually what that means. If you don't, I'm going to tell you. Musée is museum, and des Beaux-Arts is of beautiful art. So it's a museum of beautiful art. That's the title of the poem. A few other terms and ideas that we should talk about are this word. First, the old masters. The old masters, who are they? Well, he's in a museum of beautiful art. So let's assume the old masters are the painters and the great artists that were trying to capture the human position for their era. And he mentions that in the next line, how well they understood its human position. You might also need to know what the word dully means. Dully is kind of without purpose or bored. I'm sure you've heard of somebody being referred to as dull. He talks about the aged who are reverent. Reverent is being very respectful. And when he's talking about the aged, he's talking about older people who are very respectful and passionately waiting. What are they waiting for? This is the next idea that I want you to know what it is, and that is the miraculous birth. This is an allusion, A-L-L-U-S-I-O-N, allusion. When we make allusion, we're referencing something from the past that people will connect with and understand, and it'll help make meaning. And so what's being referenced here? Well, the three most commonly alluded to sources are Greek mythology, the Bible, and Shakespeare. And this is from the Christian Bible. The miraculous birth is referencing the birth of the Christ child, baby Jesus. And so he goes on to say there must always be children who did not especially want that to happen. And that's actually an allusion to, and I would never expect you to notice this on a first read. I have obviously studied this poem for a long time, but this allusion is actually referencing King Herod, who wanted all infant children, all children under the age of 2, to be killed because he was afraid of someone growing up and ascending and taking over his position as had been prophesied. So this miraculous birth and the people who didn't want it to happen, this is an allusion, and it's a reference to Christianity, and the miraculous birth is the Christ child, and this is a reference to King Herod wanting children to be dead. And we'll talk more about what that means as we analyze the poem later. The word martyrdom, we want to know what that means. That word means to sacrifice oneself for a cause. Torturer, this is of course somebody who is punishing another. Down here we talk about Bruegel again, that is Peter Bruegel the Elder, the painter of our painting over here. And you'll remember we talked about Icarus during the mythology unit. Icarus was the son of Daedalus, and Daedalus was the great inventor who was commissioned to create the labyrinth that Daedalus and Icarus were then imprisoned in, and they had to fly out of the labyrinth. And you might remember that Icarus flew too close to the sun even after his father warned him not to. And flying too close to the sun is then this idea of pride, or thinking that it won't happen to you. And that's interesting because this is a poem about suffering, and we all like to pretend that the suffering's not going to happen to us, but we know that it's a universal idea. So this is also an allusion. Bruegel's Icarus is an allusion to this painting, but Icarus, just the idea, is an allusion to falling because of one's own ego, believing that you were above it or better than it. A plowman is somebody who works in the field like a farmer. Forsaken. A forsaken cry is something that isn't attended to. The sun shone. Let's see what else. And I think you know most of the other terms in this poem. So now what we're going to do is we're going to open my analysis. So here on this document, and this is posted in Google Classroom for you, I have analyzed the poem in its entirety for you. And so there's a lot of different things going on in these lines, and we'll talk about what each of them means. So let's start with looking at the painting closely. You'll notice this is the plowman. He's just plowing along over here. It looks like there's a shepherd here because these seem to be little white sheep. And so this shepherd is looking up into the sky, off into the distance. And you'll see there are some ships here out on the horizon. And if you look very closely, here's a fisherman on the bank. And just right about here, you'll see a foot standing up in the air. And that is supposed to be Icarus's foot as he plunges into the water after flying too close to the sun. So we've already discussed the title, Musée des Beaux-Arts, and that means Museum of Beautiful Art. And if we go a little further, we can look at the first stanza. The old masters, I've already explained to you, were the scholars of antiquity. This is all written for you over here. They studied the human condition, which is always about suffering or one's attempt to avoid suffering. And then I highlight these lines for you here. While someone is eating or opening a window or just walking dully along, this is showing the ordinary day-to-day. And I like to raise the question, have you ever been driving to go somewhere pleasurable, maybe to get an ice cream, and an ambulance goes by? Do you ever just pause or stop and wonder what terrible thing is happening to somebody other than you while you're just sitting there enjoying your ice cream? It's actually unlikely. Most of us aren't paying any attention outside of our own little bubbles of what's going on, but this is exactly what Auden is talking about, that these old masters, the painters, were studying the human position, while the rest of us are just doing ordinary things, not even aware that these other bad things, these sufferings, are actually happening. And so then this is the illusion that I mentioned, the miraculous birth. It's an allusion to Christianity, and that is the birth of the baby Jesus. This is another illusion. It's the extension of that first illusion, and it's referencing King Herod the tyrant, who wanted infant babies to be killed for fear of the child ascending and taking over the kingdom. And this, again, skating on the edge of a pond, is another great example of imagery, but this is imagery used on purpose to show the ordinariness of what else was going on while these terrible sufferings were happening in history in the illusion. And then this they is an important they to pay attention to. They never forgot that even the dreadful martyrdom must run its course. Who is this they? And I would like to suggest that it's the old masters, the people who are studying it. And they also discuss here, again, in simpler terms, other things that are completely unaware of the suffering. And that is the corner where the dogs are going about their doggy business, or the horse that the torturer came on and how he's just tied to a tree, just standing there scratching himself. He's completely unaware that he was the horse that carried the torturer. So then there's a break between the two stanzas, and we get to the main allusion in the poem, and that is the allusion to the painting, and that is Bruegel's Fall of Icarus. And he says, in Bruegel's Icarus, for instance, how everything turns away quite leisurely from disaster. And so we'll just scroll back up and look at that picture, and we already discussed that, how the plowman isn't even noticing, the shepherd isn't noticing, the fisherman seems to be rather close and isn't noticing, and this ship is going to continue to sail away, and that event didn't affect any of these people. And so that is what this second stanza is referencing here, how everything turns away quite leisurely, leisurely meaning unconcerned. And then very specifically, because poems, as well as everything we write, are best in detail when we give specific examples, the plowman may have heard the splash or the cry, but it wasn't important to him. He kept about his business, right? And then down here, the sun kept shining. The sun shone. It had to. And what did it shine on? It shined on that white leg disappearing into the green water. Again, even the sun kept doing its thing despite the fact that this boy had just fallen from the sky and drowned to his death, right? And then finally, the expensive ship that must continue about its business as well. Even the ship ignored the fantastic scene that was playing out there. So I've made a note down here that really just sort of addresses the overarching theme that all human beings suffer. And the great masters, the artists who we look to for understanding in history and the world, they've all explored this idea before, what it means to suffer, how it's this collective human experience. No one escapes it. Yet when we're in the process of it, we're doing it alone. So on a more truth of the universe note, philosophers and theologians agree that one antidote for the suffering that each of us carries is that we carry it for one another, that we show up when other people are suffering and we ask what we can do to help. An antidote for this suffering that the masters have studied is that we become helpers and we do what we can to make it easier for other people when they are suffering.